Opera of the Future group and the MIT Media Lab's Hyper Instrument group. He is a professor of music and media at MIT at the Media Lab since its inception in 1985. So Todd has been doing all sorts of wonderful, inventive things for quite a long time, and he brings that great expertise and experience to this opera for sure. You'll see James Maddalena, the celebrated singer who has had such a long working relationship with John Adams in many landmark roles, and now adds the work of Todd Machover to his repertoire. Joélle Harvey, one of today's leading sopranos, who has worked at Houston Grand Opera, at Glimmerglass, New York City Opera. This year goes back to Glimmerglass, but only after singing Pamina at Atlanta for Atlanta Opera. And then pianist John McDonald, himself a composer. He is a professor at Tufts University. He says in his bio he pretends to be a pianist, but we've heard him all day today, and he's a wonderful pianist. He's a multi-talented musician, also joining us for the evening tonight. I also want to thank Ben from MIT, who's been here all day setting up this wonderful technology. But the music will speak for itself, and no one speaks better for Todd Machover than Todd himself. So I'm going to put him in.
Thank you so much, Mark and OPERA America, for organizing this event, and Boozy and Hawks as well. So as Mark said, we'd like to share some excerpts for you from Death and the Powers. The music, the score actually is finished, Mark, so that's good. We'll play some excerpts for you in a little bit, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the background of my work. I know a lot of you very, very well. Some of you I don't know, so I just wanted to place it in context a tiny bit. It is true that I was going to say for whatever reason, I've spent most of my career working with really new technology and music. But I think the basic reason, the reason I started and the reason I keep going with kind of inventing all this technology, is that for me, technology is a way of letting my imagination soar. And for some reason, when I was starting out, I got the idea that technology is extremely malleable. It's not something rigid. It's actually something that lets you build whatever you want. So when I work with technology, I imagine sounds and ideas, and technology allows me to realize what I have in my head. I usually can't do that any other way. And I was thinking about it before this salon, and I realized that opera, in fact, I didn't grow up listening to opera. I grew up playing chamber music and played the cello and then rock music. But little by little, opera, like for most of us, became the form where everything I loved, not just the music, but the narrative and drama of music and words and story and image, could all come together. And I find that the reason I gravitate to opera and have through my whole career is that it also lets my imagination soar. It lets me imagine structures and feelings and journeys that I couldn't do any other way. And when I make these operas, every single time, I don't go into it thinking that way. I go into making an opera, and it always requires something that needs to be made new and fresh, and so new things come out of it. And just thought I'd show you a couple of quick examples of how that worked. So the first opera I did was Valis, which was for the 10th anniversary of the Pompidou Center, science fiction opera based on a wonderful, wonderful book by Philip K. Dick. This one, since it was for the Pompidou Center, I had the opportunity to really imagine whatever I wanted to, and I won't go into detail about the opera, but one thing I wanted was to figure out a way to have the smallest number of musicians who I could really rehearse like a rock band, weeks and weeks, and get really a fantastic performance. But I wanted to have an enormous sound, both large sound and delicacy and richness and layers. And I couldn't figure out how to do that, so we invented some special technology for Valis, which was a way of extending what each individual performer could do. So for that piece, we invented this technology called hyper instruments. The basic idea at the time was to take, I started out with a large ensemble, ended up with an orchestra of 2 players for Valis, a keyboard player and a percussion player. The idea was to analyze not just the music being played, but how it was being played. What was the emotion behind it? Where was the phrasing going? What was being emphasized? Depending on how the music was played, the performer could then draw out many, many more layers through that single solo performance. This is something that we've developed ever since, for over 20 years now. So this is Yo-Yo Ma. We built a cello for yo-yo. We do this for rock music, many different contexts. And this grew to a whole different idea of what an instrument of the future could be like. So when I started working on these instruments, at the beginning, it was for the best musicians I could find, extending already virtuosic technique. But I started realizing, especially when we built a bow for Yo-Yo Ma, started realizing that the same technology that was measuring the bow movement could actually measure, it was actually a mistake. It turned out that his arm changed and kind of messed up the measurement of the electricity in the bow. So I realized if you threw away the bow, actually frankly, throw away Yo-Yo, although don't tell him that, you could actually measure the electricity in anybody's arm or anybody's body. You could measure natural gesture movement that anybody could do. The software we were developing for that cello also turned out to be software that could measure anybody's natural reaction to music or desire to shape music. So I started thinking about using that kind of technology to bring anybody who was interested in music into an active relationship with music, not just the great performers of the world. So that led to a project called the Brain Opera, which we premiered at Lincoln Center, actually at the first Lincoln Center Festival. This was a project where loud and clear, we made a whole orchestra of these instruments. Every one of them was playable by anybody walking off the street. Things like driving a video game, a note through a landscape, moving your arms in front of a gigantic wall, using your voice to control complex textures, moving your finger on a table to control melodies. And the public in this project actually collaborated first in exploring these instruments and making sound, and the performance was actually made up 50% of what I had composed and rehearsed ahead of time, and 50% of what that group of audience had done in the lobby with these instruments right before the performance. So it was a collaboration through this kind of hyper instrument. And through doing this, it led to all kinds of things, trying to think about how to change. Oh, actually a surprise for the Brain Operas, we toured it for a while, but then we actually worked with a company and the Vienna Philharmonic in Vienna to set up a hands-on museum for classical music called the House of Music, where the Brain Opera is installed permanently, and actually it celebrates its 10th anniversary in June. So it's been running there ever since. You can go and make your own music with the Brain Opera if you're in Vienna. It's still running, kind of running after 10 years, but it's still there. And got me interested in trying to change the way children were introduced to music. So we made a project called Toy Symphony, where we took these same kind of complex instruments, but made them small and portable, brought children together with symphony orchestras to collaborate, made some software called Hyperscore, which allowed children to compose their own original music, have it scored for symphony orchestra or for any ensemble for that matter. And actually the success that we had with children with the same kind of creative software has led to something which also I didn't really expect, which is the ability of using these kind of music tools to open up musical expression to many, many people, especially in a health context, who wouldn't have access to music expression otherwise. There are many powerful curing abilities in music. But probably the most surprising thing in that particular line of starting with a hypercello for Yo-Yo Ma was a couple of students who were in my group at that time started a little company down the block from MIT. They took that same idea of interfaces that anybody could use, software. We worked on this together. The company was called Harmonix. And they worked on this for a couple of years and came up with something you probably have heard about, which is Guitar Hero and Rock Band. So when you start these crazy projects with an opera, with something that you don't know where it's going to end up, it almost always ends up somewhere you don't expect. After that, another line of interest, all these things kind of come together in the Death and the Powers project, but Resurrection was an opera where what I wanted to do was completely hide the technology. This is an opera for Houston that was based on Tolstoy's last novel. And this is something, you know, is a Tolstoy work, grand opera, large theater. I didn't want to draw attention to the technology in any way whatsoever. So we built the technology into the pit with the orchestra. We put multiple speakers in the orchestra pit, so the blend was something quite unusual that I think you wouldn't have heard any other way. Basically to bolster sonorities and orchestration and impact both high and low timbres. And that was a wonderful project. One thing, some of you might know this person, Joyce DiDonato, who made her debut for Resurrection. Even though these projects are kind of unusual and crazy, I have been blessed over the years with working with some of the most wonderful artists, every single project, and this one in particular. Following that same line, the last thing I'll mention before going to Death and the Powers is an opera that premiered about a year ago called Skellig. And similar to Resurrection, this is an opera where the point wasn't the technology. It was commissioned by the Sage Gateshead in the United Kingdom. Beautiful, beautiful theater, based on a wonderful book by David Almond, a very famous book for young adults. And this is a book about a man living in a entourage looks like a hobo who's discovered by a young boy who lives into the neighborhood. And it turns out that he's actually an angel who's given up on the world because the world's so awful. And the young boy and a friend of his, we discovers, don't give up on this man called Skellig, and they nurse him back to health. And in turn, he helps them grow up. This is a novel. This is a story where the contrast between the natural world and natural orchestration and very natural, normal sound, and the very, very strange world of Skellig, which is, ugly and dark and based on animal sounds and quite frightening sounds, are juxtaposed and little by little over the course of the opera come together. So this is just a tiny clip from Skellig, and then I'll just give you an introduction to Death and the Powers before we listen to it.
I can't, I know I'm sorry.
Skellig to the United States, actually. More on that soon. So Death and the Powers is, in fact, a project I've been working on for a little while. It's one of the more complicated projects I've worked on. And in some ways, if Toy Symphony was an attempt, I was kind of thinking of my kids and having them have a wonderful start in music, and decided I had to kind of try it myself. In some ways, Death and the Powers came from kind of thinking of my parents and their generation, and what it means to make a legacy that can be passed on to me and to my kids, or in general to be passed on from one generation to another. What a legacy for a human life might be, and what actually could be passed on, and what the limits are. Not only the limits of what you can share with somebody, but what other generations might want to have from you. So that's basically what the opera's about. We made a kind of crazy story about it. Another thing I've been really lucky with over the years is to work with some of the most fantastic collaborators I can imagine. This project, maybe more than any other. So the libretto is by Robert Pinsky, one of my very favorite poets, who was, as you probably know, poet laureate when Clinton was president. He lives in Cambridge, not far from me, so we got to work very closely on this. Diane Paulus, who I'm sure many of you know, I think she's giving the keynote at Opera America in June. But she's, of course, a great director. She's, for the last year, been head of the American Repertory Theater at Harvard, so she's a neighbor now. And also directed Hair on Broadway. Actually, she's opening that in London in a couple of weeks. But we've been friends for a while working on this project. And Alex McDowell, the project was so unusual that I knew I needed somebody as a designer who wasn't just a stage designer or just somebody with opera experience, because the stage actually is one of the, if not the main character in the opera. I'll tell you why in a minute. Alex is one of the top production designers from Hollywood, so he designs all Spielberg's movies. He did Minority Report, is where I heard about him, but also Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He has an incredible visual and kind of scenic imagination. So that's why we worked with, we chose Alex. And like many of the projects I do, I'm also very lucky to work in this environment at the MIT Media Lab with an incredible group of young people. This project also has fantastic people with many, many backgrounds. Ben Bloomberg is one of the best. You can talk to him afterwards. We also have a brand new building at the Media Lab, really interesting, that we just opened up. So the story, very quickly before we play some excerpts, Death and the Powers is about a man, Simon Powers, who's rich, successful, powerful, in his late 60s, and also slightly creepy. We kind of think of him as kind of a combination between Bill Gates and Howard Hughes and Walt Disney. So any of these people in the room? No, something like that. And he's obsessed not so much with living forever, because actually he's kind of tired of the world. He can imagine a better existence. What he wants to do is split, but he wants everything about himself to stay in the world. He wants to figure out a way that he can go live another existence, but he wants to still control his businesses. He wants to still be able to relate to the people who he loves. And he wants his memories, everything to still be there, but he just wants to be gone. So, you know, there's his family. There's his third wife, Evie, his daughter, Miranda, a research assistant named Nicholas, who's helping him to build this system. And the idea is how to take all of his memories, everything about himself, and leave it after he's gone. And so he constructs this system. And in fact, what he does is he basically downloads himself into his environment. So as I mentioned, the stage itself, little by little, takes on the characteristics of Simon Powers. Simon Powers disappears for most of the opera. He makes an appearance at the end, which you'll hear a little bit of tonight. And little by little, the stage becomes him. And everybody who's left, his family, people in the world, because he's a powerful guy. If he's Bill Gates and he disappears, all of a sudden there's nobody to pay the bills for all the, you know, the foundations and fixing the world. So people are really angry that he's gone. His loved ones, of course, are trying to figure out, where is he? Is this really him? These walls, these objects, this furniture. And that's the crux of the opera. Where is he gone? What does it mean? And should we follow? So the main scenic piece is this element called the system. I'll just give you a couple of glimpses. This is all being built right now. So you don't have to come to Monaco, or actually it's going to be in Boston and Chicago in a year, so you can come see it at the States. But the system is the whole environment. So it's made up of a series of walls, which look at the beginning like bookcases, but transform in many different ways. All through the opera, they not only move physically, but the quality of them changes. So this is a tiny little bit, just from the other day, we're starting to build these now. This is a little bit of how Simon Powers might start to make himself appear. This is how he might ripple through the walls, or how he does ripple through the walls. We have a warehouse near the Media Lab where we're starting to build this now. So this is actually just from yesterday. These are the first little element of wall. It's kind of exciting. We're testing these. They're gigantic, actually 3 of them, all motorized. And there's a little bit of what Simon sounds like he's in the walls. So besides the walls, everything else in the room comes alive as well. It's a gigantic chandelier, I mean really big, to fill this whole room. It starts out looking like a regular light chandelier, but it's robotic, so it moves and it also makes sound. And there's actually a kind of erotic scene between Simon Powers, who now has inhabited this gigantic chandelier, and his third wife, Evie. So they sing back and forth and make sound back and forth, and finally the chandelier comes down and envelops Evie. And it's resonating on its own, and she plays back. She can pluck it and dampen it, so it's kind of the strangest sex scene in opera. This is a little what the chandelier sounds like. There's also a chorus of robots in the opera. Robert Pinsky's conceit for the opera is that it's kind of like a mystery play. The story itself is a story that's been left sometime in the future when humans are gone, for whatever reason. And these robots find this text, and like a mystery play in Salzburg every summer, their requirement is to put on this production every year. These poor robots have no idea what death is or what any of these emotions are, so it starts out with a prologue where it's time of year again, got to put the play on, you know. Yeah, we have to get our human rights status credits by doing this, and so and actually the robots take on the characters. It's as if the robots are playing the roles. Then they're a chorus during the opera, and then they come back at the end as a prologue to try to decide a little bit what has just happened. So there are 2 kinds of robots on stage. There's some called opera bots, which are about 4 feet high and then extend to about 7.5 feet high. They look like this. Tuned up. And that's when we did a workshop a few months ago, and one poor little robot made a stage debut. It was a little shy, and it's got a little work to do. But so. And then there's another category of robots which have legs, and we're going to stretchy material over them. And these are the furniture in the opera. So there's furniture on stage, not a lot of it, but the furniture either avoids people or moves around to follow characters. This is what the system looks like. Actually, in a week or so, we're going to put these together with the motors, and the the furniture basically opens and closes and crawls around the stage like this. In principle, hasn't done that yet. And then Ben is kind of our audio lead for this project. And another thing that interests me is, well, making very beautiful three-dimensional sound in large theaters. And also if you imagine a piece like this where you have this system on stage and you have objects, books, Simon, who maybe you don't see physically, but he's there or he's there. It's impossible with current technology to place a sound on a stage so that it's in that record, or you know it's in that chair. So we're doing a combination. This is the Opera House in Monaco where it premieres. Many of you have probably been there. We're doing two systems. One is a system that places speakers all around the Opera House. Not so easy in a place like Monaco where it's all, historic. There aren't too many hang points in that Opera House, but Ben was just over there to figure that out. So there's an ambisonic system that allows sound to creep off the stage and feel like it's anywhere physically in the space, and you can feel how large or small it might be. And then this is brand new. We haven't actually heard this yet. We're building it now and designing the speakers. There are many, many small speakers on the front of the stage, which uses what's called a wavefront system, which we think, haven't tested yet, but we think it's the way that will allow sounds to be placed very, very precisely on stage, so it's absolutely coming from that little tiny place. And if it doesn't work, Ben doesn't graduate, so it has to. So let's hear some music. As Marc mentioned, Death in the Powers premieres in Monaco at the Opera in September 24th, plays for a bit then. And then it comes back to Boston, ART and Opera Boston in March 2011, about a year from now. And then to Chicago Opera Theater in April 2011 and other places after that. So what we'd like to do is play some excerpts. We're going to, actually I'll introduce the performers in a second. We'll play a block from, not the very beginning with the robots, but from the first scene. The first scene is where Simon Powers is finishing his system and just about to go into the system, and it ends with him going into the system, and we'll go into the second scene, which is the transition, the transformation, where Simon Powers leaves his current existence and ends up somewhere else by the end of that scene. And then I'll say a little bit about the other two excerpts. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing performers. Can you guys come out? So Joélle Harvey, who's singing Miranda. Scene 1 into scene 2, and then I'll just tell you what the next excerpt is going to be. Obviously, we didn't bring our orchestra, we didn't bring our robots, so it's kind of stripped down, but we'll see what's. simple technology today, but just needs tiny little care. Thanks, Jim. Did you fix it?
Just goes straight to our game.
Out of nature, I will never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make from hammered gold and gold enameling, da-dum-dum-da-dum, mechanical parakeets, and set upon a golden bough to sing. Ah, the immortal William Yeats. He can have his bird, Yeats, I give you the bird. The machine is part of nature, for every machine that makes nature better, like the system that I will enter, nature make the maker of that machine. Nature is the begetter of every inventor, so machines are made by nature, the great organic machine. It's never the matter that matters. Particles, molecules, cells, fingers, eyes, nerves are only places for the system of meaningful vibration. It's all in the meaning, the movement. It's all in the meaning, the movement. It's all in the meaning, the ideal. That's the ideal. It's never the bones, the clones, the silicon ribs, the skin flake ribs. It's what you adopt and how you adapt. It's what you adopt and how you adapt. They were all amazed how a tinkerer like me could be such a shrewd master. I looked for the movement, the vibration, not the meaning, the meaning, and that's how I got rich. It's not the hog belly's hope, just a gold hesitates in the belly just head. The matter's not the medium, the system's the idea. The matter's just the medium, the system's the idea. The matter's just the medium, the system's the idea.
The matter is mortal, the system lives on. The matter is mortal, the system lives on. The matter is mortal,
The system lives on. The matter is lost, the matter is static, the matter is moving, the system is moving, the system is as a bird, maybe as a dog, a horse, a house. Body, my house, my horse, my hound, what will I do when you are fallen? Where will I sleep? How will I ride? What will I hunt? Where can I go without my mount? All eager and quick. How will I know in thicket ahead is danger or treasure? And one, if I could write dog, is dead. So said the immortal Miss Swenson. I'll be more immortal than her, or that peculiar bird, the immortal William Yeats. Now, see you later.
What
Nearer, harder, closer, higher, search it, circuit, memory, tempered, torturous quiet, dismembered a fire. No matter the matter, I did that. I am the same. The name and the matter, touch, doing, undoing, assemble the fire. Remember, I did that. Much in a while. The closer the harder. What? What's the matter? But in a circle, incumbent, remember, I am the same. Unremembered as I draw nearer, touch not enough the lights, iris that matter encumbered, remembered assembly, circle of touch, torch lighting the chamber where I am the same. chit in the circuit, dismembered a five. Remember, reassembled ensemble, assembled entire, reassembled ensemble, assembled entire, reassembled ensemble, assembled entire, trembling to acquire a semblance of fire. Remember, memory, remember whatever I did that, and I am the same, 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 I am the same,
He has been silent all last night and all day. These things are alive, this place, that is my father, alive. Is he here? Can he speak? And can we hear his voice?
Now we're going to skip. Now we're going to skip quite a bit further into the opera to scene 6. So Simon just went into the system. His family and friends and the world have been dealing with what that means. And now we just have a simple aria by Miranda, who at this point just misses her father.
Still, Father,
compressed version today. Our last excerpt is from scene 8, which is the final scene before the robots come back. And actually, Simon, who's been in the system this whole time, he's managed to convince everybody to follow him. So Nicholas and Evie, they've all figured that it's a better deal to be in the system than to be in the real world. So they're all gone. And Miranda is the only one who's held out. So Simon sends the miseries of the world. There's actually a large number of supernumeraries who throng the stage to take apart the set, in fact. And Simon's point is, the world's pretty awful. Do you really want to stay here? So this starts with a little bit of that, and then the confrontation. Simon comes back from the system for one more time to try to convince Miranda to join him. And we'll sing that scene. It'll end, and then it's when the robots would come back, but we don't have the robots. Sorry.
Try to heal the world too. But the animal is defective, defective, defective. It's not the poor or the starving that hold you back. It's yourself. I know I try to heal the world too, but it's in us. The problem's in us. It's in us. We evolved as meat to love fat and sugar. Once that was good, but now it is fatal. We evolved as flesh to want sex all the time. Once that was good, but now it's only trouble. We evolved as muscle to want to make war. Once that was good, but now that is fatal. Our fat and sugar are killing us. Our sweetness and abundance kill us and lead us to famine. Bigger McMuck, thicker sweet shake, sexier shaking the sweetness. Smarter weapons for meat. Meat wants meat. Meat wants sweet. Sweets for the sweets and the meats. Now there's no help but evolving out of the meat and into the system. It isn't the many and the few. It's yourself. Come into the world of light. Into the world of light. Come.
pull out a couple of chairs and do a little bit of question and answer before we lose these marvelous artists today. A couple of chairs, and we've had the pleasure of having them in the office all day, so we've been seeing the setup and all the wonderful sounds. It's been terrific. Great, thanks. Maestro. Todd was the keynote speaker at Opera America's annual conference in 2000 in Houston. And it's always wonderful when you get to ask a few questions of someone whose remarks were printed in our magazine so that I can actually take them out and reread them and say, well, 10 years ago you said. So 10 years ago, and you alluded to it in your introductory remarks, you said, I wanted to use technology, this is about resurrection. I wanted to use technology in a sophisticated way, but to use it so that nobody would notice it. The technology would blend in with everything. The resulting textures and the overall shape of the piece were greatly enhanced by these new means, but the piece wasn't in any way about the technology. And I think that's where we should be moving as a field. And here,
I hear laughs out there.
no. And here you have a piece that does not hide the technology, but uses the technology to go beyond what would be possible in any traditional venue. Is that just because this piece is different and calls for different technology, or have you thought differently over the last 10 years about the use of technology?
Well, I think clearly this is a piece that's required a lot of technological development, both for the staging and so I think one twist with this piece is that I didn't want, I think two things. First of all, I didn't want the technology to have most of the associations that we normally have with technology. So actually one of the, I remember probably the same thing back 10 years ago. Here we brought down our computers and we have loudspeakers, and this is the way to show off a piece like this, easily. But one of the reasons the Death and the Powers turned into what it did is that I don't necessarily like the texture of technology, and I don't necessarily like loud rock music sound coming out of loudspeakers, and I don't like the tendency of opera and theater, for that matter, to flatten the presence of human beings with gigantic screens, and so there's a real disconnect, I think, between the way that technology can extend expression and the way it tends to actually shrink people on stage. So I have teenage girls, and I've been to a lot of rock concerts this last couple of years. And the tendency in rock concerts these days, actually, I don't know, did anybody see Britney Spears' show? No hands at all. Yeah, I'm too embarrassed to say that. No, but it's interesting, because in a show like that, there were about 100 people on stage. One of them, ostensibly, was Britney Spears, although they were all the same size. And you have huge wraparound screens. And actually, for these days, usually the screens don't show the artist. They usually show some kind of illustration. And so you've got all this stuff incredibly loud, and lots of stuff to look at. So you have to put 100 people on stage, but in fact the human beings and the human presence are minimized, tiny. And even though Britney Spears was there, it didn't matter. It could have been anybody. And probably was anybody. But one thing that I thought of starting 10 years ago and that led to this project is, I was thinking, could you make a project where, yes, there's technology that doesn't diminish people, but actually extends what a person's expression and what a person's presence can be. So that first led me to think of, could you make something where the stage, the physical stage, actually is telling the story. Before I had a story, I went to Robert Pinsky and I said, I'd like to do a project where, I know I need text, so I want to, I love your writing, and I think a poet's the right thing, because maybe it should be discrete text. But could we make something where objects fly around and the stage morphs and it's physical, and the sound might be coming from vibrating objects on stage, not from loudspeakers? Could we make a piece with that texture? And then we started to think of, well, extending a person through technology, what does that mean? It's not a big stretch to see that it came to this idea of, well, can you extend your presence in the world? Can you extend your legacy? Can you extend your ability to relate to others? So it was actually from a sense of a certain kind of technology having, not having a lot of interest in, and how could you bring it to the next stage of extending a human being, and I hope that's what this opera feels like.
And you began to answer, actually, the next question that I had, which was whether this was a story you were dying to tell, and the story found the technology, or did the technology as a concept and what you wanted to do technologically originate the piece, and you then found the opera to wrap around that?
I think both kind of develop. I mean, the idea of technology wasn't any more complicated than what I just told you. That's not a very big idea. Just can you use technology to extend a human being in a way that it doesn't end up feeling technological. It doesn't end up feeling cold and electric, and it feels physical, and it feels like a person is larger than life and really physically there through this technology. But the story, you know, the idea of you know, what does death mean? Oedipus and Colonus was something that I was thinking about at that time, the third of the Oedipus trilogy, which is basically just kind of a ritual of what it means to die and how everybody else experiences that. That's what I started wanting to think about as an opera, and this ended up being the way to tell it.
You also mentioned back in 2000 that the venue is an issue when you are using the new technology, and you know, I'm smarter today because I read over a speech, and in that speech you used the word multimedia to describe little people on stage and big screens, as opposed to a more mature use of technology that maximizes the individual. And
big people on stage and little screens.
Right, exactly. You talked about the fact that venues, as we know them, are perhaps fine for the standard repertoire, but for doing works that really bring in the technology in a sophisticated way, we don't have the right venues.
No, it's still, that has not changed. So that hasn't changed a lot in 10 years. There's not a radical new way of thinking about halls. There's not a major, there aren't that many places that have the capacity to really think about halls and performance venues in a really different way. But they're starting to be thinking. I gave a talk at the ISPA conference in January, the arts presenters, and many people came up afterwards and said, you know, we're just about to think about a new hall, and we'd like to do something radical, we'd like to do something different. And it turns out there's a big conference in Dartmouth, and there's also a conference in London in June, just kind of by coincidence, of people who are either running performing arts centers or about to design new performing arts centers. It seems like people are about ready to think of something new. And that, you know, there's so many problems. I mean, the most obvious problem is it's very, very difficult, almost impossible. You won't find a single place in New York City, for instance, where you can blend acoustic sound and amplified or electric sound in a satisfactory way. It just doesn't exist. If you know of one, tell me, but I just think it doesn't exist, and Boston's even worse. You know, if you have unamplified singers and unamplified ensemble and want to make sounds coming from other sources, the hall, like Symphony Hall in Boston, is fantastic if you have an orchestra on stage. The second you amplify one person, it's muddy, it sounds terrible, it doesn't blend. There are other halls which are dry, which sound good for special amplified sound, but they don't. Turns out the place we did Skellig, the Sage Gateshead in Newcastle, which was designed, the first performing arts center designed by Norman Foster, who just did the Dallas Opera. So I haven't heard the Dallas Opera yet, but the Sage Gateshead's a miracle. It's the only place, I mean, Ben had a great time there because you could put an orchestra in the pit, you could put singers amplified or unamplified. The blend was absolutely, it was just a magnificent sound. So that's just a challenge.
It's a traditional looking venue, but one that was designed with different uses in mind?
Yes, but it also had, it's all wood. It had things like individual fans under every seat, air conditioning under every seat, so you don't have any large ventilation system. Huge wooden panels that were all movable. So, you see a lot of things with kind of crazy acoustic, all kinds of weird things people try, but these were beautiful, beautiful slabs of wood that could just change the size of the room. Ben could probably say more about how they got it right, but they got it right in most. I can't think of another hall that's as good as that. But there are other things, which is, we all know, I think I talked about it 10 years ago, we all know the black box problem. If you, either you take an existing house the way it is, and you design, it's going to be pretty interesting to put this crazy opera in the Monaco Opera House. I mean, it'll be kind of a juxtaposition, but I think it'll be very interesting. What people do on the other side is build, Conrad Cummings is here. We were in Paris together a long time ago at Pierre Boulez's Institute that had, the most beautiful black box in the world. it's still there. It's a place where it's called the espace de projection. It's a rectangle. You can tune the acoustics of it. You can move the ceiling up and down. You can move the walls. So the idea is you can do anything with this hall. It can become anything you want, but it's very neutral. The reality is, after about 6 months, everybody who builds a hall like that realizes that if you're going to do something else with the hall, you need a crew on staff, you need union people, and in Paris, like everywhere else, the hall, like Zankel Hall, you know, the hall gets put in one configuration because you can't move it, and the moving of it isn't really that interesting. You know, it's, okay, the audience is here, but how could you, you know, how can you build a hall that's an instrument like, you know, how can you build a hall where the shape of it can change, where the acoustics can change, the physical look of it can change? I actually am interested in finding an architect who's interested really in building a hall that actually is an instrument, that actually has a personality, that has, you know, it's got an unusual shape, and that shape suggests certain kinds of feelings and certain kinds of relationship between an audience and a project, and there's certain pieces that work well there and certain pieces that don't. You know, my friend, a lot of you probably know Graham Sheffield, who's been running the Barbican for the last 15 years. He surprise announcement on Friday. He's leaving London to become head of the new cultural district in West Kowloon in Hong Kong. So that's a place that's like, I don't know how many billions of dollars to build this entire new artistic neighborhood. So you got to think that that's a kind of place, and especially with somebody like Graham, who's really a visionary, that's a kind of place where somebody might say, you know, let's build one hall that's really different and that really has a whole different feel to it, different capabilities, you know.
The last question, I just want to, because you sounded it as a hopeful note in 2000 and since. You know, technology, of course, can help us make opera more inventive and more exciting. But you also said that technology needs us. We need technology. Technology needs us and what it is we do. And what do you mean by that?
Oh, I think it's, well, first of all, lots happened in technology in 10 years.
Sure.
I mean, it's, you know, it's pretty
More
amazing.
technology than an opera.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, 10 years ago, it was kind of an edgy thing to get me to come and talk to Opera America because there weren't that many people incorporating technology in opera. Now a lot of people are. I just bought my dad, you know, an iPad for his birthday. You know, just look at the technology in that thing. It's totally amazing. You know, look at something like Guitar Hero and Rock Band. You know, we could criticize them for a long time. There are a lot of bad things about them. But you know, the ideas we had 10 years ago about, well, can you make a piece of music that anybody can get their hands on and shape it? And well, yeah, you can. You know, so a lot of things are out there. But still, the reason I said that is that technology on its own, I was going to say it's evil. It's not really evil, but it's, you know, it needs to be shaped by human beings. It needs to serve, it needs to have feeling, it needs to be easy to use, it needs to convey messages that are important to people, and it needs to have a texture that is not off-putting, but is something that draws us in. And even in 2010, it turns out that it's not that easy to do that. You know, Ben and I and all the people at the Media Lab, the reason we have this lab is that we struggle every single day with, number one, how do you think of something with technology that isn't, nobody needs the next gadget now. You know, the world's in bad enough shape, we need things that actually will solve some problems and make people's lives significantly better. So how do you pick the right problems to work on? And then how do you work on them in such a way that it really, really is for somebody's benefit? And it turns out, even in 2010, it ain't so easy to do that in opera or in anything else. So
You have such a unique studio at MIT where instruments and music and opera is a part of the life of an institution that seems otherwise dedicated to different priorities. Is the Media Lab's dedication to instruments and music a core commitment, or is that a commitment because you're there and that's your personal vision?
yes, to both. No, but I think, so the person who started the Media Lab, so that, you know, we're having our 25th anniversary next year, and I see a couple of colleagues here. Edith Caperton, who was there at the very beginning, who's a pioneer in the future of education. The person who started it was a guy, two people started it. Nicholas Negroponte, who's one of the great gurus of digital technology, and Jerome Wiesner, who was president of MIT in the 70s, and before that was science advisor to Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. A great man who understood the importance of science and technology in society, and also understood that MIT couldn't possibly remain just a science and technology school. It had to be a place for people and humanism, and was a strong believer in arts and technology together. So the Media Lab was started because a group of people realized that technology left on its own wasn't necessarily going to make people's lives better. And the reason I came back from Paris, where I was working at this great music and technology center with Pierre Boulez, it was a great place, but it still had a very narrow idea of what music meant in society and who made music and who music was for. And the Media Lab started with this idea that, you know, the arts are deeply important to our lives, just as education is, just as, you know, having a decent, you know, being able to make a living and having a decent society, and that technology had a place in all of these, and that if you could get people in one place, some of whom were artists, some of whom were programmers, some of whom were building machines, some of whom were educators, that something unusual would come out of it. It wouldn't just be the next piece of music, and it wouldn't just be the next curriculum. It would be some very unusual hybrid of all of these. And I think that's another discussion, but I think I'm at the Media Lab because it's given me the freedom to think in unusual ways. And I think, you know, certainly I've been there a long time, and I like a little bit of the way the Media Lab is certainly because of the way I kick it around, I guess.
And this is an advance bit of information, but we will be doing our 2011 annual conference in Boston in May of 2011, and Todd and I are already talking about a day that we'll spend in Cambridge, so we can see the Media Lab at MIT and visit Diane Pulse at ART. So if you're curious about some of this, stay tuned for a May 2011 annual conference in Boston. Normally I open it up to questions, but because we are on a time limit with our stream, I'm going to thank Todd here, but invite everybody to stay for a glass of wine, some water, and feel free to greet one another. I know that several people are here in a kind of reunion of sorts, and please feel free to greet Todd and ask him questions. So, Todd, thank you so much.